Hey guys, tonight we drift into a city unlike any other, a city that sparkles atop a lake, floats on dreams, and hums with the sleepy rhythm of a civilization that learned to farm without ever leaving bed. You're surrounded by soft ripples and glowing torchlight. Wooden canoes pass by, loaded with squash, amaranth, and maybe a snoozing farmer or two. Ducks paddle past your fingers. Waterbirds tiptoe across floating gardens like it's a runway show for wet feet. This is Tenochtitlan, the crown jewel of the Aztec world, nestled in the heart of Lake Texcoco. And yes, it's literally sitting on a swamp. You're wandering through a metropolis where buildings float, crops rise from the shallows, and farming might just double as an elaborate excuse to nap. It's all very romantic, until you realize that the water isn't exactly spa grade. Also, there are crocodiles, and the occasional priest with opinions about your heart not being inside your body. So, yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from. Drop your location and the time in the comments. I love knowing who's snoozing with me from across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glide over a narrow canal, moonlight dancing across the water, casting silver shadows that sway like kelp. On either side, rows of raised plots stretch out like patchwork. These are chinampas, floating gardens anchored with willows and dreams. A scent of wet earth and sweet maize fills your nose. You trail your fingers in the cool water, wondering how a city this immense and intricate ever floated at all. It began with a prophecy, or at least a bird and a cactus. Legend says the wandering Mexica people were told by their god Huitzilopochtli to settle where they saw an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus, devouring a snake. Not exactly Zillow's top recommendation for real estate, but sure enough, in the middle of a swamp, there it was. Eagle, cactus, snake. Bingo. Tenochtitlan rose from that soggy promise. Built on a lake, it pulsed with canals instead of roads. You didn't walk to the market, you rode. And no, not in some cute gondola. In long wooden canoes, half filled with onions and possibly a screaming goose. The city's layout? Symmetrical. 4 cardinal directions, like a cosmic compass. A grid system the Romans would have clapped for if they weren't too busy conquering cold hills in sandals. At its peak, the city may have held over 200,000 souls. Some say even more. Historians still argue whether it rivaled any European city of its time. Madrid who? You're in a place where architecture met astrology and agriculture was a water ballet. But how do you grow food in a lake? It's not like corn floats. That's where chinampas came in. You're drifting past them now. Long rectangular plots built from mud dredged from the lakebed, laid atop mats of reeds, staked down with trees, and left to settle like lasagna layers. It's farming meets, engineering meets, let's not let our lettuce sink today. Every inch of Tenochtitlan depended on these floating fields. Corn, beans, squash, chilies, enough food to keep a metropolis thriving, and enough extra to throw elaborate feasts that probably involved dancing, cocoa, and a guy dressed as a hummingbird. And yes, everything here had symbolism. That avocado tree over there might represent fertility, the frogs croaking in the reeds, possibly sacred, or just obnoxious. Hard to tell. Either way, you're walking through a city where nature wasn't just respected, it was woven into daily life like thread in a god's tapestry. You pass a vendor sleeping under a blanket of maize husks. His boat rocks gently with the current, loaded with marigolds and tomatillos. Somewhere, a flute plays a melody that melts into the night. You're not just watching history, you're floating through it, one gentle paddle at a time. Just don't lean too far over the edge. Those ripples, they hide more than fish. The lake still remembers. Your canoe drifts along the edge of the lake, the hush of water folding into your ears like a lullaby whispered through time. The smell changes, no longer just wet earth and flowers, but something older, wilder. The kind of scent that comes from centuries of roots digging into mud, of footsteps vanishing beneath silt, of people deciding somehow that this giant puddle was home. You glance around. The lake stretches in every direction, glittering like spilled starlight, and you wonder, with a sleepy squint, why here? Why not pick a mountain, a meadow, a nice beach with less mosquito drama? Well, that's the thing. The Mexica people didn't exactly choose the swamp. They were driven to it, forced out of better land by other tribes who weren't thrilled about sharing. Imagine showing up to someone's neighborhood barbecue and asking to stay forever. That didn't go over well. So the Mexica wandered, for decades, maybe centuries, until they arrived at Lake Texcoco, a shallow, brackish, mosquito-infested basin where your boots would squelch and your lungs would protest. There were other islands, yes, but they were taken. The Mexica looked at the soggy middle, saw the infamous eagle doing his snaky business on a cactus and said, "Yep, that's our sign." It was a bold move. Lake Texcoco wasn't just a lake. It was a hydrological nightmare. Half salty, half fresh, prone to flooding, and surrounded by prickly politics. But the Mexica had something better than beachfront optimism. They had ingenuity, and they had floating gardens up their sleeves. Well, loincloths. But still. The first steps weren't glamorous. They had to wade in knee-deep muck, hauling reeds and mud like exhausted swamp artists. They built artificial islands one handful at a time, layering reeds, mud, and even garbage, which, let's face it, is just early composting with an attitude. Then came the stakes, wooden posts driven deep into the lake bed, often with young willow trees planted to hold the structure together. The willows didn't just root, they thrived, weaving the chinampa into place like nature's own duct tape. The result? Solid, buoyant plots of land that seemed to float but were actually anchored, growing food where no one else dared to plant. Suddenly, the swamp wasn't a burden. It was a resource. The Mexica turned exile into empire, swamp into sustenance. Now, as your canoe brushes past a fresh chinampa, you spot something odd, a clay figurine half buried in the soil, a tiny god with wide eyes and a crooked grin. Fringe scholars have suggested some farmers left idols buried in the rows, little tokens to ensure a good harvest, or maybe just to scare the birds. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, religion, or the Aztec version of a garden gnome. You glide past a farmer's canoe piled high with maize stalks. He nods at you, half asleep, a straw hat tilted low. That's the thing about chinampa farming. It didn't demand backbreaking labor. Once built, the gardens were absurdly fertile. The lake provided water, nutrients, and a gentle microclimate. You could grow up to 7 crops a year if you timed it right, and most of that time, you waited, you napped, you trusted the mud. Some say this is where the phrase, "plant it and chill," was born. Okay, no one says that, but they should. You squint at the water's surface. Something large and lazy rolls just beneath. Probably a fish. Probably. The lake was full of life. Axolotls, turtles, birds, eels, and not just food. The Mexica used lake resources for medicine, pigment, even hair gel. Yes, there's a record of using crocodile dung in beauty treatments. We're not saying it worked. Just that it happened. And that's the magic of this place. What looked like a wasteland turned into one of the most advanced agricultural systems in the ancient world. The Mexica saw mud and saw potential. They saw hardship and built floating miracles. You close your eyes. The boat rocks gently. Somewhere in the distance, a conch shell blows. You can almost hear the eagle's wings, still circling above, reminding you that from the muckiest soil, whole civilizations can rise. Your fingers skim the water's surface, stirring a trail of lazy ripples as your canoe glides beside one of the chinampas, those floating gardens that make swamp survival look like a spa retreat. Up close, they're not exactly floating like rafts, more like hovering, suspended above the water on layers of soil and reeds so thick you could throw a party on one. Not that you'd want to risk spilling guacamole into the lake. Again. So how do these things work exactly? The chinampa isn't just a patch of dirt. It's a masterpiece of swamp sorcery. First, Aztec farmers would start with a base, woven mats of reeds that floated just enough to stay above the muck. Then came the mud, scooped lovingly from the lake bottom like frosting on a cake. And not just any mud. This was nutrient-rich, sludge deluxe lake goo, full of decomposing fish bits and whatever passed for vitamins back then, a bit of algae, maybe a whisper of eel. Next came alternating layers of plant matter, more mud, and sometimes ash or even charcoal, because even 15th century Mesoamericans understood soil chemistry better than that one guy in your group project. Every layer added weight, richness, and stability. They'd line the edges with ahuejote trees, a type of fast-growing willow whose roots dug deep into the lake bed, anchoring the chinampa like fingers clutching a plate. No soil erosion, no garden drifting away in the middle of the night. Just the world's coziest island farm. As you drift beside one, you notice the order. Rows of maize, squash blossoms curling in the morning air, beans climbing poles in a silent race toward the sun. Companion planting, an ancient method still used today. Corn grows tall, beans climb the stalk, squash spreads wide and chokes out the weeds. It's a dinner party in plant form, also known as the Three Sisters. This trio was the agricultural Beyoncé, Kelly, and Michelle of their time. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs invented chinampas entirely on their own, or refined older traditions from cultures like the Xochimilca or Teotihuacan. But whatever their origin, these gardens were brilliant, self-irrigating, incredibly fertile, and efficient. And let's face it, they look ridiculously peaceful. You half expect a duck to paddle over and offer you tea. Here's the twist. The Aztecs didn't stop at just planting food. They grew flowers, glorious, riotous blooms of marigold, dahlia, and morning glory. Some of it for temples, some for trade, and some just to make the place look like a botanical daydream. Even their agriculture had aesthetic goals. Imagine weeding your flower beds and knowing half your crop will be worn by a priest at a ceremony involving exactly 0 OSHA compliance. You pause beside one particularly lush chinampa. The air is thick with the scent of cilantro and sun-warmed earth. A hummingbird darts past your face, pausing mid-air like a tiny vibrating drone. It hovers near the purple blossoms of a toloach plant, known to be mildly hallucinogenic and occasionally used in rituals. Fringe researchers whisper that some farmers may have dosed themselves lightly to commune with the crops. You raise an eyebrow. The plants do look like they're waving at you. Maybe it's the breeze. Maybe it's the tolosh. A farmer nearby snores in the shade of a canoe turned sideways. His hat tilts over his eyes, his dog sprawled across his chest. You realize that once planted, these gardens needed minimal maintenance. The lake did the watering. The soil never went dry. The climate was stable. You could lie down after planting and wake up to harvest. It's farming, yes, but with nap breaks that would make a modern office worker cry. The canoe drifts farther, and you spot little wooden walkways bridging one chinampa to another, narrow enough to make you question your balance, sturdy enough to haul a basket of tomatoes without a splashy end, and sometimes, in the distance, the faint sound of a flute. Music, even in the fields. Because if you're going to garden, you might as well have a soundtrack. One account describes chinampas as the most productive land in Mesoamerica, capable of feeding thousands. Some claim that an acre of chinampa could produce up to 7 times the yield of a traditional plot. Historians, of course, debate the exact numbers, but even the skeptics agree this was some serious ancient innovation. You can't fake that much corn. So you float, eyes half-lidded, drifting beside this patchwork of productivity and peace. It's hard not to be lulled into imagining your own floating garden. No deadlines, no meetings, just seeds, sun, and a bit of mud under your fingernails. Well, that, and the occasional eel slithering past your feet. Your canoe gently bumps against the edge of another chinampa, the soft thud rocking you back into a slower awareness. The garden here is bordered by ahuejote trees, their long, graceful branches dipping into the water like they're trying to cool off their toes. Sunlight spills through the leaves in dappled patterns. You're floating through a painting, if the artist was a civil engineer with a flair for willow trees and ancient mud. But don't let the calm fool you. This place didn't build itself. Behind every serene row of maize and blooming marigold was the mind of someone who understood water, soil, and gravity better than most of us understand our email folders. These weren't just gardeners, these were engineers, and some of them wore feathered headdresses while solving water table dilemmas. Because if you're going to redirect a lake, you might as well look fabulous doing it. Picture it. You're ankle deep in mud, the sun overhead, chinampa half constructed, and your cousin just realized you built the slope wrong, so now water flows into your house. What do? You haul in more reeds, shift the boundary logs, layer more silt, and smile like it's all part of the plan. Aztec farmers weren't just toiling in the dirt, they were constantly tweaking a complex hydraulic system. No degrees, no calculators, just generations of observation and a whole lot of elbow grease. See that canal over there? It's not just a pretty waterway, it's a drainage route, irrigation line, and transport path all in one. The widths were standardized, just enough for 2 canoes to pass with some polite grunting. Chinampas had to be built in rows, with channels in between, allowing farmers to paddle in and out, harvest and plant, and occasionally chase a wayward duck. Historians still debate whether they used tools like plumb lines or leveling rods, but evidence suggests they had a keen eye for gradient and balance. Water flowed in controlled trickles, not chaotic floods. They even created sluice gates to manage water flow during the rainy season, and during dry spells, they didn't panic. They dredged deeper into the lake bed and carried more silt. This wasn't subsistence farming. This was aquatic infrastructure. At the southern edge of the city, engineers constructed dikes, massive earthworks that separated fresh and salt water. One famous dike, attributed to the emperor Nezahualcoyotl, a name that, if you can pronounce on the first try, earns you honorary citizenship, stretched for miles. It protected Chinampas from salty intrusion, allowing fresh water to pool around crops and preventing the lake from rebelling every time it rained. And did we mention they did all of this without iron tools, draft animals, or wheels? That's right, no wheelbarrows, just sheer determination, woven baskets, and possibly some muttered curses in Nahuatl when the mud didn't cooperate. But the most impressive feat? They made it sustainable. Year after year, generation after generation, the Chinampas remained fertile. While fields in Europe were exhausting their soil and praying to saints for rain, the Aztecs were scooping up more mud, planting more trees, and letting nature do half the work. Fringe researchers suggest they may have even rotated crops and used algae as a natural fertilizer. One theory claims that certain areas had planned fallow cycles, sections left to rest while others thrived, a method eerily modern for something designed while people still thought thunder came from angry gods. You drift past a worker balancing on a narrow beam between Chinampas, a bundle of reeds on his back, his dog trotting behind like a little four-legged supervisor. He's not hurrying. No one seems to. There's a rhythm here, a pace that flows like the water, slow and deliberate. Every step echoes centuries of design. Suddenly, your canoe bumps into something soft and wiggly. You flinch. It's a bundle of reeds, dried, tied, and ready to be layered into a new garden. You're literally colliding with innovation. Congratulations. A scholar once described Chinampas as the most productive and efficient form of agriculture ever devised by humans. Maybe that's a stretch. Maybe not. But it's hard to argue with what you're seeing. Floating islands, perfectly balanced ecosystems, and engineers who probably measured water levels with their toes and still got it right. And they didn't stop at farming. The same principles guided the city's expansion. Buildings were constructed on raised platforms, elevated walkways connected neighborhoods, and canals became highways. Tenochtitlan was a place where architecture grew out of the lake like a lily pad with ambition. You imagine someone sketching plans with a charcoal stick on bark paper, pointing with pride at the blueprint while wearing a hat made entirely of quetzal feathers. Priorities. People. You float under a wooden bridge where children toss marigold petals into the water. The petals swirl like tiny suns, drifting toward a narrow gate that filters water into a reservoir. The city wasn't just functional, it was beautiful, and that's what made it sacred. So the next time you complain about your leaky sink or cracked driveway, remember the Aztec engineer in a feathered cloak who built a floating garden in a swamp using nothing but mud, math, and stubbornness. And yes, his eyebrows were probably perfect. The canoe rocks gently as you settle into the idea that maybe, just maybe, farming doesn't have to be a frantic, soil-covered sprint. Maybe it can be slower, sleepier, dreamier. Welcome to the philosophy of the Aztec Chinampero. Plant with intention, then nap like it's sacred work. And honestly, you've earned it. You drift past a plot where a man lies flat on his back beneath a blooming pepper bush, a straw hat over his eyes, and a dog snoring on his chest. Beside him, the soil is freshly turned, seedlings poking through in tidy rows. There's no frenzy here, no hustle culture, just the kind of faith in nature that lets you doze next to your dinner in progress. The beauty of Chinampas was that once constructed, they practically ran themselves. The water surrounding each plot wicked upward into the soil, keeping it consistently moist. No daily watering required. The roots reached out to find what they needed. The sun did the rest. Farmers could nap nearby, not out of laziness, but because the system allowed it. Your job was to observe, adjust, listen, sometimes whisper sweet things to your beans. You pass a plot with tiny clay pots buried in the earth, mouths poking just above the surface. A fringe theory says some Aztecs used unglazed pots filled with water as an early irrigation system. As the soil dried, it would pull moisture through the porous clay. Passive watering. Elegant. Like a houseplant hack designed by someone who actually respects naps. And it wasn't just the soil doing the work. It was the cosmos. Aztec farming followed the rhythms of the calendar, both solar and ritual. They planted during auspicious days, in alignment with the gods and the moon, trusting that timing and intention were just as vital as compost and elbow grease. Historians still argue whether these astrological planting rituals had measurable effects or just soothed anxious farmers. Either way, when your cucumber's destiny is linked to Venus, you tend to treat it with respect. You spot a woman placing crushed eggshells into the rows, natural calcium, straight from the family kitchen. Another drops in chili ash, organic before it was trendy. Everything had a second life. Kitchen scraps became fertilizer, feathers scared away birds, and even human waste, processed and composted, was returned to the earth. Waste not, want not, unless you're downwind. Here's the part that really makes your pillow-loving heart flutter. The Aztecs had resting huts right on the chinampas, tiny shelters made of woven reeds or rough wood, just big enough for a mat, a blanket, and a farmer who'd had enough sun. You could work the field, then crawl a few feet to take a nap without ever leaving your plot. It wasn't laziness, it was harmony between body, plant, and planet. You wonder briefly what dreams came to farmers sleeping beside their crops. Did they dream of rain, of full baskets and gentle floods? Did they wake to the sound of a breeze and know the gods were pleased? There's something sacred about that trust, closing your eyes beside your livelihood and believing the land will hold you. You pass a young boy placing tiny paper flags on sticks into the soil, not for decoration, for memory. A code to remember which plot held tomatoes, which grew maize, maybe even which ones had secrets. Fringe scholars believe some flags marked plots with ritual significance, offerings buried beneath, prayers folded into the roots, maybe even bones. But we're not going there yet. Don't worry, you'll sleep just fine. A hawk circles overhead, scanning the water. You watch its shadow glide across the chinampas like a hand brushing fabric. Here, humans weren't separate from nature. They were part of it. The chinampas blurred the line between built and born. Your farm floated. Your path shimmered. Your bed smelled faintly of basil and frog. A boat glides by, piloted by a young man who hums under his breath. His hands trail in the water, catching floating duckweed. He tosses it onto a compost pile, smiling at the splash. The Aztecs composted everything: lake scum, dead fish, kitchen waste, even ceremonial ash. The soil beneath your feet might be older than the pyramids, smarter too. And it worked. Chinampas could feed thousands. Some estimates say a single chinampa could yield 7 harvests a year. Maize, beans, chilies, tomatoes, herbs, and even flowers, all growing in tight, efficient rows. And while Europe was battling plagues and rotating fields with a hope and a prayer, the Aztecs were planting while horizontal. But of course, not everyone bought into the nap strategy. Some neighboring cultures scoffed. "You sleep next to your vegetables?" they'd ask. "Is that sanitary?" And yet, they kept buying Aztec produce. Lots of it. Tenochtitlan became the supplier for the entire region. Its marketplaces overflowed with fresh goods hauled daily by sleepy canoemen with dirt under their fingernails and lullabies in their heads. So now, as your boat bumps gently against a plot of chard and epizote, you think, maybe the best farming isn't about domination. It's about cooperation, patience, timing, and yes, well-placed naps. You lie back in the boat, the water lapping softly at the sides. Somewhere, a farmer snores beneath a squash vine. The garden hums around you, alive, ancient, and still listening. The air thickens with the perfume of green things. You sit up slightly in the canoe, inhaling the scent of herbs, fresh soil, and something floral that dances just beyond memory. The chinampas ahead are bursting, absolutely bursting, with life. It's like a supermarket aisle collided with a wildflower meadow and then decided to stay for brunch. You drift past rows of amaranth, its deep magenta plumes swaying like feathers in slow motion. The Aztecs didn't just eat amaranth, they worshipped it. High in protein, easy to grow, and strangely delicious when popped like popcorn, this plant played a starring role in ceremonies, snacks, and sacred statues made of dough. Yes, statues. Made. Office dough. Which were then offered to the gods and sometimes eaten afterward, because sustainability was just that sacred. Next comes chili peppers, dozens of varieties. Some green, some red, some so spicy they could probably peel paint off a canoe. The Aztecs used chilies in food, medicine, and even punishment. Historians still argue whether particularly naughty children were once forced to sit in chili smoke as a form of discipline. If that sounds extreme, remember, this is the same culture that casually used obsidian blades in rituals. Mild salsa wasn't really in fashion. You float past patches of tomatoes, small and jewel-like, not the bloated supermarket kind. These are the ancestors of every pizza topping you've ever loved. Their vines wrap around woven supports, already heavy with fruit. Then come squash plants, their huge leaves fanned out like parasols, and golden blossoms fluttering with the occasional bee, the whole row humming with the sound of pollination. Squash wasn't just a food, it was a vessel. Dried gourds became water jugs, storage pots, even musical instruments. Nothing wasted, nothing idle. Then the herbs. Oh, the herbs. Epazote for digestion, cilantro for brightness, huitlacoche, the so-called corn smut, a mushroom-like fungus that invaded maize and was then cheerfully eaten as a delicacy. You lean in. The smell is earthy, fungal, a little decadent. You'd try it. Probably. Maybe. With enough salsa. Fringe theories claim that certain plants were grown not for consumption, but conversation. With the gods, with the dead, with nature itself. Toloache, for instance, pops up again, its white trumpet flowers dreamy and strange. Shamans used it in rituals, and it's said to inspire visions or send you spiraling into celestial giggles, depending on dosage. Let's keep your intake imaginary for now. And then, the flowers. Oh, wow. You enter a chinampa that seems to have been planted by a poet in a very good mood. Marigolds, blazing orange, used to guide spirits during rituals and festivals. Dahlias, tall and smug, nodding their pom-pom heads as if to say, yes, we were royal emblems. Thanks for noticing. Sunflowers, though smaller than modern hybrids, twist their necks toward the sun with the quiet ambition of ancient solar panels. One fringe historian swears the Aztecs used flower placement to send messages, like botanical Morse code. A row of marigolds meant joy. A dahlia and 3 chilies, possibly, don't talk to me until I've had my cacao. We can't confirm it, but it feels true. You glide by an elder woman, kneeling among the rows, placing tiny bundles of herbs beside each plant. Offerings, companions? She murmurs something into the soil. You won't intrude. Her hands are stained green. Her voice sounds like it belongs to the earth. The variety here is staggering. Over 200 species of edible plants were cultivated in the region, and likely more used in medicine, ritual, or decoration. Tenochtitlan wasn't just feeding people. It was healing them, delighting them, inviting them to experience the land. It's the original farm to table, except it's lake to nap to table. You catch sight of a beehive tucked into a wooden box beside the peppers. The Aztecs used stingless bees native to the region, harvesting their honey for food and medicine. The honey was floral, complex, and probably paired well with that corn fungus you're still debating about. And there, just under the canopy of a vine, is a little wooden flute. Unattended, maybe forgotten, or maybe left there intentionally. Fringe theories suggest some farmers played music to their plants, believing it encouraged growth. Others say the flutes were for scaring birds. Either way, you like the image of a man serenading his cilantro. Historians agree. The biodiversity of the Chinampa system was unmatched. These gardens weren't monocultures, they were mosaics. Crops grew beside herbs, flowers beside trees, frogs beside butterflies. It wasn't just about food. It was about balance. You didn't own the land. You collaborated with it. You whispered. It whispered back. You trail your hand along the edge of a plot where someone has planted sweet potato, avocado, and beans in a spiral. A design, maybe. A family emblem. Or just a bored farmer with aesthetic leanings. You smile. In a place like this, even agriculture had flair. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of crushed basil and something citrusy. You close your eyes for a moment, surrounded by floating islands of scent and color, by leaves and blossoms and seeds that remember stories older than language. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize you're not just floating through a farm. You're gliding through a bouquet built by civilization. Night settles over the lake like silk, quiet and luminous. The last threads of orange retreat behind distant mountains, and the stars blink into view, mirrored perfectly in the glassy black water. You're still drifting, slower now, guided more by current than paddle, your boat sliding past chinampas that glow dimly with scattered torchlight and flickering cooking fires. This is when the gardens shift, when the day's vibrant colors soften into shadow and the whole floating world takes on the hush of a dream. Don't be fooled. This place doesn't sleep. Not exactly. It changes. You pass a man in a canoe, casting a line into the dark water. He's fishing by feel, not sight. The lake is full of eels, their slick bodies winding through the roots of the chinampas, nibbling at algae and small crustaceans. They were a prized food source, slithery but rich, and surprisingly helpful in maintaining balance. Some farmers believed eels cleaned the gardens. Fringe theorists suggest they were also seen as mystical, silent watchers of the underwater world. You watch one ripple past, glowing faintly in the moonlight like a ribbon of ink. And then there are the owls. You hear one before you see it, a low hoot, deep and steady, echoing across the canals. Then another, answering from across the water. In Aztec mythology, owls were messengers of the underworld. Not necessarily evil, but definitely unsettling. Farmers welcomed them, though. Owls kept rodent populations low, their wings silent as smoke. One lands on the corner of a chinampa ahead, head swiveling to stare directly at you, judging your vibe. You nod politely. Torches bob in the distance, other boats moving between gardens, night farmers collecting herbs or checking traps. A few wear white tunics that almost shimmer in the dark. They move quietly, with the confidence of people who've spent years navigating watery footpaths by starlight. You drift closer to a garden that seems brighter. Moonlight bounces off something unusual, rows of plants covered with thin, pale cloths. A technique, perhaps, to hold warmth or protect delicate seedlings. But some whisper that special night-blooming plants were cultivated here, ones that only opened under starlight, their pollen infused with moon magic. Historians still argue whether this was botanical wisdom or ritual performance. Either way, it's beautiful. The flowers unfold slowly, shyly, revealing soft petals like creased parchment. A splash. You turn in time to see a frog, large, almost theatrical, leap from one chinampa into the canal. In Aztec lore, frogs were symbols of water and renewal. Their croaking at night was thought to summon rain or even attract Tlaloc, the god of storms. Some farmers claimed certain frogs sang differently when drought was coming. You're not sure about that, but tonight, the chorus is rich and rhythmic, like a lullaby composed by amphibians. You reach a narrow inlet where chinampas cluster tightly, forming a secret grove. Here, a man tends plants with a lantern, the flame glowing in a carved gourd shell. He moves in a circle, checking each plant gently, touching, murmuring, not in Spanish, not in Nahuatl, in the secret language of farmers everywhere. Concern, love, low-stakes nagging. He leans against a tree and lets out a yawn so deep it could fertilize tomatoes. That's the thing. Night farming wasn't unusual. It was practical. Cooler temperatures, fewer pests. The gardens, wrapped in dew and silence, came alive in their own way. Some claim night-harvested herbs had stronger properties, that moonlight imbued flowers with more potent magic, that sleeping beside your crops under starlight created a bond, plant and farmer dreaming the same dream. A low, rhythmic sound draws your attention. A woman rows past slowly, her boat filled with bundles of mint and sage. She hums as she rows, a tune with no words, just sound. Maybe it keeps the eels calm, or maybe it's for her, a lullaby for herself and the water and whatever's listening under the reeds. And yes, there is something under the reeds. You pause, peering down. The water's darker here, deeper. In some places, old tools and offerings lie buried in the mud. Obsidian knives, pottery shards, bone combs. Once part of daily life, now part of the lake's memory. One fringe archaeologist swears some chinampas were built atop ancient ceremonial platforms, long sunken and repurposed by nature. Others laugh it off. But as your boat glides over a particularly still patch, the silence feels aware, not threatening, just old. You exhale. You're not afraid. Not really. There's a peace here that goes deeper than sound. The gardens breathe in the dark. That's the only way to say it. And then, there it is. A flower you've never seen. Luminescent, pale blue, glowing faintly like moonstone. It pulses with a soft light, so faint it might be your imagination. The petals are open, cupped like they're listening. A breeze stirs, and they tremble. You reach out, not to touch, just to be near. And in that moment, under the owl's gaze and the frog's song, surrounded by plants that never sleep, you feel something shift. Not dramatic, just gentle. A thread, tugged softly between you and the earth, through the roots and water. the breath of trees and coils of eel. The gardens do not stop. They wait, they grow, they watch, and if you listen closely enough, they speak. Morning returns slowly to the lake. No alarm clocks, just the soft shimmer of sunlight pooling across the chinampas like warm honey. You blink awake in the boat, still adrift, the reeds around you rustling with whispers of new day. Birds flit overhead. A turtle slides off a log with a tiny splash. You yawn, stretch, and for a moment wonder, was it all a dream? Then the smell hits you. Fresh tamales steaming from a distant canoe, mingled with roasting maize, the spice of crushed chili, and something sweet, maybe cacao being stirred just out of sight. Yep, still here, still floating. You spot a gathering up ahead, people drifting in by boat from all directions. They've tied their canoes to the edge of a wide chinampa cleared of crops. Banners flutter overhead, strung from willow to willow. Someone beats a drum softly. A vendor sets out woven mats, herbs, and clay cups that steam with something suspiciously chocolatey. A festival, a market, a day off? Not quite. It's an Aztec farming day, but the kind you'd actually look forward to. You paddle closer and realize you've stumbled onto one of the ritual feasting days tied to agriculture, where the lines between farming, food, dance, and devotion got delightfully blurry. And yes, there's dancing. In the center of the chinampa, a group forms a wide circle, feet stomping softly, rhythmically, like seeds being pressed into the soil by song. Feathers flash, flutes sing, and a woman tosses marigold petals into the air as if blessing the crops with beauty. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were religious offerings or seasonal celebrations, or both. But what's clear is that farming in Tenochtitlan wasn't just about dirt and sweat. It was about joy. You float closer and overhear snippets of song, some words to the maize gods, others teasing chants that sound suspiciously like ancient farmer jokes. A group of young men attempt to spin while balancing baskets of squash on their heads. One fails dramatically. There's laughter. It's fine. The squash is fine. Mostly. Aztec society, as rigid and hierarchical as it was in certain areas, also carved out space for celebration, especially in the life of the chinampero. After all, when your crops nearly water themselves, you've got time to dance. You drift past a cooking station on a canoe, yes, a floating kitchen, where women stir great pots of maize porridge and hand out corn cakes wrapped in banana leaves. Children dart between boats, balancing sticky treats and chasing one another with half-serious threats of, "I'm telling Tlaloc on you." It's easy to forget sometimes that the people of the Aztec world didn't live their entire lives in the shadow of war or sacrifice. They also feasted, flirted, raised children, told jokes, and occasionally took naps next to squash vines. The chinampa was their pantry, yes, but also their playground. A fringe theory suggests that music and farming were deeply intertwined, not just culturally, but practically. Some farmers believed that playing instruments while working encouraged crops to grow better. Maybe it was the rhythm. Maybe it was the vibration. Maybe it was just a way to make hoeing more fun. Either way, flutes and drums weren't just for temples. They were for tomatoes, too. And then there were the storytellers. You catch one mid-tale, surrounded by an eager audience balanced on upturned baskets and canoe benches. He's describing the origin of the first chinampa, which, according to this version, floated down from the heavens on the back of a giant serpent who just really loved eggplants. Is it canon? Not really. Is it hilarious? Absolutely. Aztec society understood that memory lived in laughter as much as in stone. The stories passed on knowledge of soil, of water, of when to plant and when to harvest, all wrapped in a tale that kept you listening. Better than a textbook. Slightly less peer-reviewed. The sun climbs higher and the dancing slows. People begin to disperse, some heading off to tend their plots, others napping under awnings, bellies full and hearts light. You spot one man rowing away, trailing a garland of marigolds behind him, his paddle stirring slow spirals in the lake. He's not in a hurry. No one here seems to be. You glance around. The Chinampas are alive again with work, yes, but also with leisure. A couple lies stretched out under a pepper tree, sharing a roasted ear of corn like a secret. A child floats paper flowers in a tiny reed canoe. Somewhere, someone naps. And that's the beauty of it. The Aztec relationship with farming wasn't about endless toil. It was about balance, work and rest, sweat and story, planting and pausing to admire the way the marigolds sway. Sure, the empire had its harsh edges, its laws, its rituals, its obsidian-sharp expectations. But in these floating gardens, you find something softer, something slower, a reminder that food isn't just survival. It's ritual, it's rhythm, it's community. You lean back in your boat, letting the breeze carry you. Somewhere a drum taps one last beat. A frog croaks in reply. A farmer sings quietly to a basket of beans. And you think, maybe this is what it means to truly live with the land, not on it. You've drifted further now, past the lingering laughter of morning festivals, and into the quieter waters beyond the main canals. Here, the Chinampas stretch farther, more isolated, more strategic. The plants remain, lush as ever, but the air feels different. Still rich with life, yes, but charged with something sharper. This was where farming fed more than families. It fed conquest. The Aztec Empire didn't just grow vegetables to fill market stalls and dinner bowls. It grew armies. Those same serene Chinampas you floated by earlier, they also supported a powerful, expanding civilization with big ambitions and sharp spears. Tenochtitlan was a military powerhouse, and every soldier it sent into battle needed food. And not just any food. Energy-rich maize, beans, and chia to fuel long campaigns. Historians still debate the logistics, but many agree that the vast Chinampa system gave the Aztecs a critical edge. They could support standing forces without overtaxing faraway lands. Their capital was self-sustaining. That's a big deal in a time when most empires crumbled under supply shortages and poorly planned oat rations. You pass a plot where chia plants wave gently in the breeze. This tiny seed was a military superfood, lightweight, nutrient-dense, and sometimes even used as currency. A soldier could survive days with just a pouch of it. Think of it as the ancient Mesoamerican energy bar, minus the plastic wrapper. And yet, amid all the strength this system brought, it also exposed a strange truth. Lettuce can, in fact, be lethal. Not by itself, of course, unless we're talking tragic salad-related allergies, but in scale. The Chinampas' insane productivity meant Tenochtitlan could grow so much food that it could exert control over neighboring regions simply by being well-fed. Economic pressure. Tribute systems. You give us warriors and gold. We give you corn and not starving. Fair? Farmers were part of this machine, whether they liked it or not. While some Chinamperos lived peacefully in their gardens, others produced goods earmarked for the military, food that would be stored, rationed, and sent with war parties. These floating gardens became logistical hubs, fueling campaigns hundreds of miles away. And though it's not as flashy as a jaguar-clad warrior swinging a macuahuitl, a basket of dried maize could tip the scales of a battle just as effectively. A fringe theory even suggests some chinampas were deliberately hidden or disguised, producing secret reserves of crops to feed elite guards or serve as backup in case of siege. They were the quiet insurance policies of an empire that understood. No army marches on an empty stomach, and no ruler keeps power without controlling the grain. As your canoe glides further, you notice something different. Raised platforms with low walls. Ancient foundations? Possibly. Or maybe military watchpoints used to monitor key canal routes. Historians argue over this. Some say they were just ceremonial platforms or drying areas for crops. Others believe they served dual purposes. After all, the line between agriculture and defense here was often thin and wobbly. You round a bend and see a group of men training with staffs beside a garden, practicing footwork between maize rows, strengthening bodies while surrounded by sustenance. That's how it worked. The land fed the fighter, and the fighter protected the land. A closed loop, efficient, quietly menacing. Nearby, a small shrine stands at the edge of a chinampa, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. Offerings lie at its base, flowers, small food items, and a bit of blood, dried on a shard of obsidian. Just enough to say, "We're watching. We're grateful. Please keep burning bright." And what of the warriors themselves? Many came from farming families. Some even returned to chinampas between campaigns, trading spears for seed baskets, armor for ash fertilizer. War wasn't a permanent occupation. It was seasonal, just like harvests. There's a haunting kind of poetry in that. You pause as you drift by a boat piled with dried tamales and roasted squash, battle rations being loaded for transport. There's no fanfare, just a rhythm, a pattern. This wasn't glory-seeking. It was maintenance. The empire kept moving because food kept arriving. One record describes vast state-run storehouses scattered across Tenochtitlan, filled with dried maize, beans, salt, and chilies, supply centers that fed both the army and the poor in times of famine. The Chinampas made this possible. Their abundance wasn't just about luxury, it was about stability, or control, or maybe both. And yes, there were taxes, not in coin, but in corn. Commoners owed tribute in goods, and for many, that meant sending portions of their Chinampa yields to the state. You might grow chilies for your family, sure, but a percentage of those spicy little pods were going straight to an elite's table, or a general's. Yet even within this structure, the system didn't collapse. Somehow, the Chinampas produced enough to feed the people, enough to fuel expansion, enough to support dancers, dreamers, warriors, and nappers. You lean over, watching tiny fish dart between submerged roots. A single squash blossom floats by, torn loose from its stem, golden and delicate. It drifts lazily in your wake, trailing the whisper of a question. Can food be a weapon? Here, the answer is yes. But it's a soft weapon, a silent one, a bloom on a lake that hides a blade beneath. You lie back, rocked by the steady rhythm of the current, and listen, not to drums or flutes this time, but to the quiet hum of a system that never needed to shout. The air changes again as you drift farther from the heart of Tenochtitlan. The torch-lit festivities are behind you, and ahead lies the quieter edge of the Chinampa network, where fewer boats glide, and the lake feels broader, deeper. The gardens here are less curated, more wild. The kind of place where the line between cultivation and chaos is blurred by dragonflies, lily pads, and the occasional ominous ripple. You pause. Something surfaces with a gurgle, not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. A pair of eyes watches you, unblinking, just above the waterline. Then, with a flick and a soft splash, it's gone again. Was that a crocodile? Yes. Possibly. Crocodiles and caimans lurked in parts of the lake, especially on the fringes. While they weren't common inside the central city canals, they did patrol the outer shallows, scaly sentries with no interest in taxes or tamales. The Aztecs knew to avoid them, or in some cases, respected them as symbols of power, fertility, and the unknowable moods of water gods. One legend even claimed that the earth itself was built on the back of a great crocodile, its spine forming the mountains. You gently adjust your seating. You're not panicking, you're just aware. The Aztecs weren't naive. They understood that a floating garden system required constant vigilance. Nature was generous, but also moody. Floods, storms, invasive reeds, unpredictable beasts. So they developed incredibly clever risk management systems centuries before the concept of crop insurance had a name. See that line of poles sticking out of the water in the distance? Those weren't random markers. They were canal boundaries, sometimes reinforced with living fences made of reeds or trees. These didn't just keep boats aligned. They helped contain floods. When heavy rains came, as they often did, water would overflow the lake's edges and threaten the chinampas. But the Aztecs were ready. They built retaining walls from bundled reeds and woven mats, weighted with stone and anchored with willows. These walls absorbed excess water, reducing erosion. In some places, canals were diverted manually. Temporary sluice gates opened or closed to redirect flow. A system of aquatic valves run by people in sandals and big hats. Call it swamp hydraulics. Still, things didn't always go smoothly. In particularly wet years, entire sections of chinampas could flood and rot. Crops drowned, paths washed away. That's when the real work began, rebuilding from the mud, dredging new silt, planting faster-growing crops like amaranth to make up for lost time. One fringe account mentions a ritual performed after a catastrophic flood in which chinamperos offered bundles of chili and maize husks to the lake, along with chants begging Tlaloc for a lighter hand next season. Whether it worked or not is up for debate, but historians agree that these disasters weren't just weather events. They were cosmic messages, signs of imbalance between humans and the gods, or between humans and their own hubris. Then there were the pests, not just insects, but birds, rodents, and the occasional sneaky neighbor accidentally harvesting your squash. Aztec farmers deployed scarecrows, reflective surfaces, and even trained animals, small dogs perhaps, to patrol the gardens. One particularly unverified account suggests some farmers tied rattlesnake skins to the ends of poles to frighten would-be thieves, which either worked brilliantly or ended in a lot of screaming. You pass a canoe loaded with firewood and bundled reeds, materials used to reinforce a chinampa recently hit by a storm. The man paddling has the expression of someone who's patched the same wall 3 times in a week. He's muttering, possibly to the gods, possibly to himself. Yet despite all these hazards, the chinampa system endured. More than endured, it thrived. Its resilience wasn't just structural, it was communal. Neighbors helped each other rebuild. Extra food was shared, seeds exchanged. It wasn't just land that floated. It was an entire culture of mutual reliance. You pass a group of children playing on a half-dry chinampa, balancing on logs and tossing pebbles into the canal. One has a frog tied to a string, which seems rude but historically accurate. Another's trying to build a mini chinampa in the water with mud and reeds. It's going about as well as expected. The future engineers of the empire, clearly. Nearby, an elder repairs a canal wall, tying bundles of dried reeds into place with palm fiber rope. He does it by memory, no blueprint, no measuring stick. The shape, the angle, the tension, all passed down through generations of hands. You realize the system isn't just in the landscape, it's in the bodies of the people. A kind of muscle memory civilization. Suddenly, you hear a splash. Not alarming, just abrupt. A heron takes off, flapping low across the water, trailing droplets like silver threads. You follow its path and spot something curious. A cluster of canoes with covered tops parked along the canal's edge. Storage boats? Perhaps. But another theory suggests these were mobile seed vaults, designed to keep key plant varieties safe and dry, even during major floods. A floating backup plan. Ancient genius in plain sight. The further you drift, the more you realize that the chinampas were never just about growing food. They were a constant conversation with the elements, a balance between control and surrender, between hope and mud. And when things went wrong, as they always do in nature, the Aztecs didn't curse the land. They planted again, built again, dredged the lake and told stories and whispered to their seedlings that next time would be better. Because when you live on floating gardens, resilience isn't optional. It's tradition. The lake is still again. A cloud drifts overhead, softening the light, and you find yourself floating near the center of a chinampa that feels older somehow. Worn. Quiet. Even the birds seem to pause here, as though acknowledging something sacred beneath the soil. The rows are orderly, as always, but the plants seem different, taller, quieter, leaning in strange directions. You notice no one is nearby, not a single canoe, no chatter, just the creak of branches and the hum of distant insects. And then you see it, a small altar tucked under the twisted roots of a willow tree, candles, flower petals, a few feathers, a crude obsidian knife, black as shadow. You shift in your seat. Here's the thing. You've napped next to squash. You've danced among chili stalks. But there's one part of Aztec agriculture that people rarely mention when talking about floating gardens, and it isn't exactly bedtime story material. Let's just say, the Aztecs were very thorough with their composting. Okay, deep breath. There are records, plenty of them, of human remains being buried near or even within chinampas, and not just any remains. Often these were the bodies or parts of sacrificial victims offered to the gods and then returned to the earth to feed the soil. It sounds grim, but to the Aztecs, it was a full circle kind of logic. Blood feeds maize, maize feeds people, people feed gods, repeat forever. Historians still argue whether human remains were intentionally used as fertilizer or simply buried in agricultural zones for symbolic reasons. One camp says it was a practical solution. Blood and bone make excellent compost, and the Aztecs, always efficient, simply knew this. Another camp insists it was spiritual, the sacrifice completing its journey, body returned to nourish the land it once walked on. There are also tales of sacrificial ceremonies held directly on chinampas, especially during planting festivals. One account describes a priest wading through shallow water to reach a floating platform, blessing the seeds, then making an offering, a heart, still warm, lifted to the sun. The blood would soak the soil, the corn would sprout, and the cycle continued. You float past another willow, its roots trailing like fingers in the water. Someone has tied ribbons of maize husk to the branches. An offering? A ward? It's unclear, but the feeling lingers. And yet, amid the solemnity, there's something else. A strange kind of peace. The Aztecs didn't fear death in the way modern minds often do. To them, death was not the end, but one movement in a larger pattern. A phase, like planting or harvest. A chance to give back, literally. Their gods weren't just hungry for blood. They demanded balance. And balance required sacrifice. You pass a patch of land with unusually tall amaranth, its stalks almost unnaturally red. Some scholars believe specific crops were grown only in consecrated soil, plots where offerings had been made. And the crops from these lands? Reserved for temple use, elite ceremonies, or medicinal tonics meant to treat both body and soul. A fringe theory suggests that a few chinampas were entirely ceremonial, never harvested at all. Sacred islands in a sea of sustenance meant to grow only offerings, flowers for the dead, maize for rituals, herbs for smoke, floating altars disguised as gardens. You reach a bend where the canal narrows, shaded by thick branches. You spot small bones embedded in the canal's edge. Animal, perhaps. Maybe not. Erosion reveals strange stories, but there's no sense of menace here, just memory. And yes, this raises questions. Did every farmer approve? Was everyone on board with the idea of heart-fed harvests? Probably not. The Aztec Empire was vast, and belief wasn't universal. Some saw these rituals as sacred necessity. Others, perhaps, as a burden of empire. Historians still debate the extent to which agricultural workers participated willingly, or simply carried on because it was what the land and their leaders demanded. You pass another altar, smaller this time. Just a bundle of marigolds, a clay flute, and a smudge of something dark in the soil. The lake laps gently against the chinampa's edge, as if remembering something it can no longer say out loud. It's easy, from the safety of modern kitchens and supermarket aisles, to forget where food comes from, what it asks of us, what it once demanded. The Aztecs didn't forget. They lived in a world where every seed carried weight, not just of nourishment, but of story, of sacrifice, of responsibility. Every bite of corn was linked to someone's offering, someone's prayer, someone's heartbeat. You drift in silence for a while. Then, just ahead, you hear laughter. A child's. Bright, sudden, normal. The spell breaks. You turn a corner and rejoin the main canals. Life continues. Vendors call out. Dogs bark. Someone's burning chili again. Too much, as usual. But the smoke rises anyway, curling toward the sky like a thread tying this world to something bigger. The darker gardens are behind you now, but you won't forget them. Because even in a world of flowers and floating farms, the earth remembers what fed it. The lake narrows now, the waters calm and familiar again, the air filled with bird calls and the occasional creak of a paddle cutting across the surface. You've looped around the southern edges of Tenochtitlan and begun drifting outward, farther than most tourists or time travelers usually go. And here, beyond the dense heart of the capital, the chinampas keep going. Maybe thinner, maybe quieter, but still there. Because the art of the floating garden didn't stop at Tenochtitlan's city limits. It radiated outward. These gardens, so tied to the Mexica Empire, were not exclusive to it. Long before the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, other groups were already experimenting with similar systems. The Xochimilca, for instance, were early champions of chinampa-style cultivation, especially near the southern lakes and wetlands. Some even argue they invented it. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs refined the system or merely perfected an older technique. You won't solve that tonight. But as you float through the wider canals of Xochimilco, now a quieter region south of modern-day Mexico City, you can feel the echo of those first rafts of reeds, pushed into shallow water by hands long forgotten. The chinampas here are different, less uniform. Some feel ancient, worn, overgrown, tilting slightly into the lake like they've decided retirement is just a good nap away. Others are vibrant, freshly tilled, full of sunflowers and squash, maintained by modern farmers who inherited more than just land. They inherited memory. You pass a man in a straw hat who waves at you. His boat is loaded with produce, not for ritual, not for war, for market, for life. These chinampas are still working, still feeding people. And beyond here? The technique spread even farther. There are records of floating gardens popping up in Toluca, Tlaxcala, and even farther afield. After the Spanish arrived, crashing through the empire with horses, steel, and a disinterest in asking permission, they too saw the genius of the system. They didn't always admit it. Colonial accounts sometimes describe chinampas as uncivilized swamps, even as they requisitioned the food that flowed from them to feed their own growing cities. But some friars and administrators recognized the brilliance. They preserved the structures, forced local labor to maintain them, and used the produce to supply Spanish governors and bishops. In true colonial fashion, deny the knowledge, exploit the result. Fringe researchers suggest the Spanish even tried to export the technique to Europe, unsuccessfully. Chinampas, it turns out, require a certain kind of environment: shallow lake beds, mild climates, steady water levels, and communities willing to work with, not against, nature. Try building one in a frosty Bavarian bog and watch your squash weep. You float past a stretch of canal where a few chinampas have collapsed, just outlines now, muddy shapes beneath the water. But even here, life returns. Lilies bloom, frogs perch. A new generation of trees claims the old soil. The land remembers what it used to be. And it's not just the past. In the 20th century, and even now, activists, ecologists, and indigenous farmers have worked to restore and protect what's left of the chinampa system. Some have turned to permaculture, using ancient techniques to regenerate soil, clean water, and grow food sustainably. A few urban schools now teach chinampa gardening as a way to reconnect kids with their heritage and their dinner. There's even a market niche. Chefs from trendy Mexico City restaurants paddle out to source organic heirloom vegetables grown in chinampas, paying top peso for tomatoes that taste like time travel. You're floating past the farm-to-fork movement, Aztec edition. You pass a group of students in a canoe, notebooks open, sketching. A local guide explains how the roots of willow trees stabilize the chinampas, how lake mud enriches the soil, how reeds filter impurities, how diversity of planting protects from pests. It's agriculture, but it's also ecosystem design, botanical choreography, swamp ballet. And yet, there's fragility. The water's not as clean as it once was. Urban sprawl looms. Pollution, overuse, and the slow creep of concrete threaten what remains. But the people here don't give up easily. Just like their ancestors, they rebuild, replant, and reimagine. You float by a chinampa where bright plastic streamers wave in the wind, hung between two ancient trees. A party was held here recently. A birthday? A wedding? A good harvest? The music is gone now, but the colors remain. Testament to the fact that these gardens still hold life, not just grow it. You think back to that first floating plot you saw, perfect rows, glistening leaves, a farmer dozing beside a dog. And now, Here you are, at the edges of the known Chinampa world, and the picture isn't as pristine, but it's still real, rooted, evolving. Because the Chinampa isn't just a thing, it's an idea, a way of thinking about land and water and time, a way of farming that doesn't fight the lake, but listens to it. You drift now through waters that feel less like a story and more like a dream remembered. The sky is wider here. The city hums far behind you. And in front, Xochimilco. The name rolls off your tongue like a spell. This is where the last true Chinampas live, defiant and flowering in the shadow of modernity. The air smells of wet earth and fresh cilantro. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a guitar, soft chords drifting over the water like birdsong dressed in silk. You pass under a wooden bridge painted bright red, its rails draped with bougainvillea vines, and suddenly, you're surrounded by color. Floating gardens thick with zinnias, coxcomb, and endless rows of marigolds, all blooming in joyous defiance of time. This is not just a tourist destination, though tourists come here by the boatload. This is a battleground of memory, a botanical archive, a miracle still whispering across the surface of a lake most people forget exists. And yes, this is also where the Chinampas refuse to die. The Aztecs are long gone. Their empire crumbled under steel and smallpox, their temples shattered, their gods forced underground. But their gardens? Somehow, they remain. You pass a farmer crouched on his knees, elbow deep in compost. His plot is tiny, barely 20 meters across. But the rows are straight. The maize is tall. The tomatoes gleam like ornaments. He looks up, gives a small nod, and returns to work. No feathers, no fanfare, just soil and patience. Historians marvel at this. 500 years of floods, colonization, and urban sprawl, and yet Xochimilco's Chinampas still grow. Not all of them, maybe only a fraction, but enough. Enough to remind the city that its roots are here, under this mud, in these waters. You spot a sign staked into one Chinampa. Este terreno es agroecologico. This land is agroecological. It means the farmer's doing it old school. No pesticides, no industrial nonsense. Just sun, lake, and stubbornness. Some call it organic. Others call it heritage. A fringe movement has even begun to digitally map the surviving Chinampas, cataloging species, soil types, even ancestral planting techniques. Drones flying over a system designed with no metal tools. There's poetry in that. But this isn't a museum. It's alive. You float past a group of high schoolers planting seedlings in neat lines, their teacher explaining how the water table is dropping, how climate change threatens the lake, how they'll need to fight to keep these gardens breathing. And still, they laugh. They dig. They get mud on their shoes and pretend they don't like it. Some boats here are decorated, brightly painted trajineras, hired by families for weekend fiestas. The air is full of mariachi music, the clinking of bottles, and the squeals of children who've just realized their paddle is stronger than their uncle's hangover. And in the middle of it all, the gardens endure. One Chinampa has been turned into a conservation sanctuary for axolotls, those strange little salamanders that live only in these waters, with their perpetual grins and feathery gills. Almost extinct, they cling to survival in the canals between corn and chili plants. You peer into the water and catch a flicker of movement, pink, curious, ancient, a living fossil in the shadows of an empire. Axolotls, like Chinampas, shouldn't still exist. And yet, here they are. You pass a faded sign nailed to a tree. Sembramos para no olvidar. We plant so we don't forget. Because the chinampa isn't just a garden. It's an act of resistance, of memory, of whispering yes to the land, even when the world says no. You think of all the hands that touch this soil, from the feathered priests to the sleepy farmers, from the kids building fake chinampas out of mud to the students mapping them with tablets and satellite data, all connected. You see a small altar on a chinampa corner, simple, just a clay pot with burning copal, some flowers, and 3 ears of maize laid out side by side. An offering, maybe for the gods, maybe for the ancestors, maybe just to say, we remember you. You pass under a willow tree, so old its trunk has split in half, forming a gate. You drift through, and for a moment, everything is quiet again. Just the splash of a fish, the sigh of reeds. You're not in a museum. You're in a survivor's story. Xochimilco breathes with the lungs of ghosts and gardeners. Its waters still hum. Its earth still listens. And as your boat moves forward, the chinampas reach out around you, rooted in mud, floating in time, and refusing to let go. You drift along the canal with the air sweeter than before, ripened tomatoes in the sun, the snap of chili stems under bare fingers, and the soft perfume of wet soil warming beneath your boat. After everything you've seen, the temples, the tools, the unspoken blood in the dirt, you're left with a curious question tickling your modern mind. Could you actually do this? Could you, a creature of deadlines and lattes, plant a garden this smart, this serene, and maybe take a nap while doing it? You paddle gently past a newer chinampa, a modern one, tidy but modest. The wood looks fresh, the layout's clean. And the rows? Not bad. Some kid with a dream, you think. Someone with just enough rebellious spirit to dig a plot of history back into the present. Maybe they read about the Aztecs online and thought, what if I just grew cilantro and didn't check my email? It starts with mud. It always does. And yes, you can replicate a mini chinampa. It might not float in a real lake, but you can build one in a backyard, a raised bed, even a bathtub if you're brave. The principles are eternal. Layer organic matter. Use good drainage. Let water work for you. And choose your plants wisely. No monoculture. No nonsense. You float past another chinampa. This one has a hammock strung between 2 ahuejote trees. A cup of cacao sits untouched on a nearby stump. There's no one in sight, just the whisper of breeze and the hint of a nap recently taken. You smile. That's the dream, isn't it? Here's how you do it, if you're bold enough to try. Start with a frame. Wooden borders, low and rectangular. Fill it with layers, sticks, leaves, scraps, soil, and lake bottom silt if you have it, or the closest thing you can find at your local garden center that doesn't require scuba gear. Think lasagna, but for carrots. Next, water. Keep the bed moist. Ideally, build it beside a water source, or make a self-watering system with buried clay pots or drip lines. Nature loves slow hydration, not frantic sprinkler schedules. Then comes the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican gardening. They support each other, nourish each other, and form a plant family that never argues over holidays. Add marigolds to keep the bugs confused and the ancestors pleased. Add herbs, because flavor matters even when you're pretending to live in the 15th century. You pause, watching a woman in a straw hat whisper to her basil plants. She's barefoot, walking slowly between rows, holding a cup of something that smells faintly of cinnamon and enlightenment. You don't need a PhD to do this. You need rhythm, patience, humility, and naps. That's the hidden genius of Chinampa culture, the rhythm of work and rest, of letting nature carry half the weight. Most modern agriculture is noise and violence, engines, blades, schedules. But here it's more like conversation. You plant, you observe, you nap, you adjust, you share, you trust. A fringe gardening blog once argued that Chinampa-inspired systems are ideal for the lazy gardener with high expectations, which is hilarious and not entirely wrong. The beauty of the system is that it's intelligent, not intensive. It does more with less. It lets plants be plants. And you? You just need to stay out of the way and bring snacks. There's a myth that the Aztecs had no word for relax. Totally false. They relaxed plenty. The system they built made sure of it. And you can too. Here's a starter kit from history, just for you. Plant and pray. Trust your soil, your water, and the weird power of the moon. Sleep beside the compost. Not literally, but spiritually? Absolutely. Measure time in tomatoes. Forget clocks. Watch the vines. Let ducks patrol your garden. Bonus points if they wear tiny sombreros. Dance between rows. You don't have to, but try it once. No one's looking. You pass a man sitting on the edge of his chinampa, fishing lazily with a bamboo pole. There's a tomato behind his ear, a book beside him, and a loaf of bread in his lap. His garden hums behind him, full of life he doesn't need to fuss over. He's not conquering nature. He's participating in it. That's the ultimate lesson here. The Chinampa isn't a monument or museum. It's a mentality, a gentle dare from the past to stop overcomplicating everything. You don't need 5 apps to track your carrots. You just need a good patch of dirt, a willingness to listen to frogs, and a quiet place to dream. You're back in the center now. The canoe glides slowly through moonlit water, and Tenochtitlan rises around you, not just as a city of stone and ceremony, but as a living garden afloat on mirrored stars. The torchlight flickers on the canal's surface. Someone far off strums a quiet tune. You drift past the final rows of maize, the last blossoms of marigold, and into the soft exhale of this ancient dream. This is where the journey settles, where all the floating fragments of time, soil, water, and memory fold together like petals closing for the night. You glance to the left. A farmer is collecting flowers in silence, placing them gently into his canoe like they're secrets. He rows with care, not haste. He isn't feeding a market. He's feeding a story. To your right, a woman scatters dried herbs into the canal, for luck, for the fish, for reasons only she and the gods know. Her chinampa is small, curved like a smile, bursting with color even under the pale sky. And you? You float through it all, not just through geography, but through continuity. You remember the start, the eagle on the cactus, the swamp that nobody wanted, and now you see the truth. The swamp wasn't a burden. It was an invitation. The Aztecs didn't tame it. They listened. They didn't conquer the lake. They learned to float with it. The Chinampa was their answer to the oldest question: how do we survive and belong all at once? It wasn't just engineering. It was philosophy. Grow close, grow slow, grow with rhythm. Even in its decline, after empire fell, after swords and fire and flood, the Chinampa remained. Some collapsed into water, others endured, and a few, just a few, became immortal, quietly feeding the soil, the people, and the dream. You spot a child napping beside a squash vine, their straw hat tilted over their eyes. A dog guards a pile of onions nearby. Fireflies blink lazily between rows of beans. The lake reflects the stars above so perfectly you could almost paddle through the sky. And it hits you. The chinampas never really left. They're in your balcony herbs, in the compost under your sink, in the raised bed behind your neighbor's shed, in the quiet ache to build something slow, beautiful, and kind. You don't need an empire. You don't need a lake. You need a little space, a little mud, and the willingness to float. Now the sky grows darker still. The torches burn lower. Even the frogs have fallen quiet. The city exhales, and the gardens keep breathing, because they always have, because they always will. Because even now, 500 years later, the art of planting while napping is still the gentlest rebellion we have left. You pull your blanket tighter. The water laps against your boat like a lullaby in liquid form. The chinampas fade behind you, row by row, light by light, dream by dream. And somewhere, out on the still lake, someone plants one more seed in the moonlight, just in case. The lake is silent now. The chinampas have gone to sleep, blanketed in moonlight, their roots drinking in the quiet. The canoes are tied. The flutes are silent. Even the water seems to move slower, content to rest after a night of memory. You drift gently, almost motionless, your body light, your thoughts softer than mist. Every sound is muffled, like cotton wrapped around the world. A frog stirs once, then settles. A breeze brushes your cheek like a hand made of air. The reeds sway in rhythm with your breath. And the gardens? They're still working. Quietly, tirelessly. Roots stretching beneath the water. Blossoms leaning toward starlight. Seeds unfolding without hurry. You picture them now. Corn growing in the dark. Beans wrapping around stalks. Flowers blooming in slow motion silence. The lake holds them all like a lullaby cradles a dream. You are not alone. You are floating in a world that was designed to nourish, not just the body, but the soul, where naps are sacred, where soil is sacred, where every heartbeat echoes through water, mud, and blossom. So let go. Let your breath sink low. Let your arms go heavy. There is nothing more to do. Nothing left to plant tonight. The garden is working. You've done enough. Close your eyes. Sleep. Float. Dream.